Okay, so let's go ahead and show this video. So the first thing we have here, this is just a Maya sphere with a material on it. It's already been stretched. So there's going to be a couple of small issues when we send this to Mudbox. Okay, so this is how we're going to send it to Mudbox, or at least for this first pass, this is how we're going to send it. So if I go File, Send to Mudbox, Send as New Scene. It's going to open up Mudbox, and it's actually opening it up on my other screen, but I'll show you the error it's going to give you right off the bat, and I'll explain why. So, this is the error it gives you as you first open it up. It says there's a high valence vertex, and so that means that there's a whole bunch of edges that all meet in one point. That's just bad modeling wise. I love that the fact that we created a default sphere and it already has that in it is bad. The other thing is there's UV faces crossing the tile boundaries. Okay. Now we can say keep the mesh, but you'll see that if we do that, what we end up getting is a file that works except for this one strip, and then we get these two little red dots at the top. I'm not as worried about the red dots, but let's look at why we're getting that little strip. If I go to modify, if I go to Window, go to my UV texture editor, select my sphere, you'll see that Maya wants to push the UVs all the way to the edge. Okay, so if I grab all of these, if I can scale them. Sorry, I just thought of something that may work a little bit better. No, this will work. So what I can do now is just go in here, select all the UVs, and very, 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 very slightly scale them in. Just a real tiny bit like that. And that's just going to get them off the edge. It's going to give us a little bit of an inconsistency on that edge, but that will help for now. Okay, and so that will get rid of that first error. Okay, so if I open Mudbox back up, I'll save those, and I just send this to Mudbox again, File, Send to Mudbox, Send as New Scene. So I'm still going to get this high valence vertex error, but for now I'm alright with that. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK, and we'll get this. Now, I could make some changes to this, and hold on one second. Sorry, I had to find my pen. I could make some changes to this model that would allow us to not get that that valence issue. So what Maya's actually wanting is, or what Mudbox is actually wanting, is for this cap to be gone. And so there's a couple different things we could do for that, but the easiest one that I've found is if I just select this vertex, okay, this single vertex, go to Mesh, Edit Mesh, and then extrude the vertex. Okay, and I'm going to set all these numbers really low, at 0.005, 0.01, and hit Extrude. I'm going to get a really, really, really tiny peak here. You see that? And now I can go to Faces, and I could actually just delete that. And so what that gives me is at the very center of this is a whole bunch of little quads. Okay, and I'll show you the difference of that in the UV editor. So if we go to Window, UV Texture Editor, you'll see that the top of this one, this is the one that we still haven't done, just kind of comes to these points, right? And that's why we get some kind of strange looking texture stretching here, right? But the top of when we just cut now has these edges, and so what I can do is I can grab these UVs, pull these up to the top, go through here, grab these edges, weld those together, and we're getting a little bit of a cleaner UV set now. And so we could do that if we wanted to get that a little bit better. It still doesn't look perfect. Like if we get in here close, we'll still get some weird areas where each of those are not lining up perfectly. I think that that's sort of an issue in the way that they wanted us to create this mesh. So minimize that. Let's go back up to Mudbox. It's alright to start sculpting on it like this though, and so let's look at how Mudbox works for those of you who have never used it. So what we have here is just our original mesh. You see over here in our object list we have our cameras, we have a material, some lights, another blue material, and we have the object, right? And you'll see that we have a brush. Now Mudbox out of the box kind of works very similar to Maya in its tools. It works very similar to the Sculpt Polygon tool, that if I just start painting on here, I'm going to start sculpting it, right? If I hold down B, I'm going to be able to resize my brush. Okay. And I want to say somebody told me earlier that N, or M, apparently not, but we can also make some changes to the strength of this brush. But you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm just sculpting this out. And so these are my sculpt tools. So I'm going to go to layers, and so for this P sphere here we can add additional layers. Okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to subdivide this a few times just to give us some more detail. So I'm going to go Mesh, add new subdivision level, which is Shift D. And you'll see that it subdivided it, and so I'll do that maybe 2 more times just to get us a little bit more detail in here. Okay, and so now we can use all of these tools to start sculpting on it, and you're seeing we're getting a lot of interesting results. Now this is going to be best if you're using the Cintiq with a stylus, but the Sculpt tool, these are going to allow us to, all these different things are going to do slightly different things. So Sculpt is going to sort of pull, and you can see my strength right now is set to 1. I'm going to set that to something lower, like 0.1. And then if I start sculpting, you can see that I'm actually pushing and pulling the mesh, and so I'm actually getting a little lumpy piece there. Now if I do something and it's too lumpy, or it's too, let me try to subdivide this again, get some more detail in there. So let's say I go in here and I make my brush a little bit smaller. I do this ridge around here. Let's say that's close to how I like it, but it's a little too lumpy. I can hold Shift, and Shift will kind of smooth it. So let me turn off the wireframe. It's actually W will do that. But if I hold Shift, Shift will kind of smooth that out. And so let me show you. You can see that what it's doing when I hold Shift and do it. Now, the alternative is if I hold Control, I can do the inverse of what the tool is doing. So basically, at this point, I'm pushing down into the model, okay, instead of pulling out. And so just by doing that, I can get little bits of sculpted pieces. I can make my brush a little bit bigger. Hold down Control and just sort of push all of this in a little bit to get that shape. Okay, and so this is how we can start making some very interesting textures here. Now, all of these do different things. Grab is going to literally grab and pull stuff. Okay. Pinch is going to push pieces together, so we're going to pinch it together. So that's a really nice way to kind of get a crease going. Flatten is going to flatten stuff out. Foamy is going to feel like it's adding stuff onto it. That value is way too high. And so foamy works kind of nice. I like the knife tool here. Sorry, for some reason my Cintiq has a hard time picking that up, because that'll let us cut holes in it, and this value is way too high. Let's do 0.2, and you're going to see that's going to let us like kind of cut into it, and then that's a nice way of sort of digging what you need. Now you'll see that on my tool I have steady stroke turned on, and that was just on the knife tool. What steady stroke's going to do is it's going to allow you to keep a slightly cleaner stroke because you're dragging this line. Okay, and so if I don't have steady stroke turned on, you see that my well, it doesn't look bad, but it's a little harder to keep your pencil or your line as clean. So that's a nice little tool. And so just play around with these different ones. Those are some that I personally like. Now, something I forgot to tell you to do is I just did all this sculpting right on the mesh, but we can actually add layers and sculpt directly on those layers. Okay? And now when we turn that layer on and off, we can hide parts of that. Now let me show you why that's beneficial. Because we have a couple of, right now our stamp is set to off, but we have a couple of different ways of sort of painting in texture here. And so if I turn that on, you'll see that I'm kind of adding the texture from this brush onto my model. And at this point, maybe my mesh is not subdivided enough. So I've divided a few more times just so we can see this stuff. And you're seeing where our values are getting up here pretty quick. We're at, what was that? We're at 1,500,000. But if we, and when we up our subdivision layer, we have to make a new layer. But you see that when we do this, we can start getting some pretty neat texture to this model. And so that's a nice way to kind of, add just a little bit of interestingness to it. Right? And so that may be a little too much. Maybe I would just not press as hard, or maybe use a different stamp. We can also use stencils, and stencils are going to, let me go back to my stamp and turn that off. Stencils are going to put an image up in front of you. There we go. We can kind of see how that's in front of our model now, and as we paint, it's going to paint that onto it. So you see that that's what that's kind of doing to it here. And so I'm holding shift and just trying to smooth some of that out. So that's a nice way to start getting some lumpiness to it. You just have to be careful how much you add. Now, some of you may need to actually paint things onto your model. Okay? And so you'll see that when I brought this in, we have sculpt layers and we have paint layers. Well, we can add additional painting to here, and you'll see we also have paint tools. I want to turn this stencil off just so we can see it. And so I can quickly add another paint layer, choose the size, and using my paintbrush and whatever color I select, I can start painting on top of this layer. Okay, so say I want my flood paint layer. I just painted the whole thing brown, but now I want to multiply that on top of it. And so we can use some of the multiply layers. We can adjust our visibility of it, and we can also paint texture in with some of these stencils, these stamps as well. So let's say I wanted a bunch of red streaks on this planet. I can now sort of paint those into it. Obviously this is not probably what you're going for, but get a little bit of this wispiness to it. All right. And maybe from there I will play this as a screen, maybe a let's try color burn, right? And so this is a nice way to get some interesting texturing going on as well. Okay, so now this is not particularly the best way to go about this. I'm just kind of doing something so we'll see what we have. Keep in mind we can also add a new layer, and we can choose this to not just be our diffuse. We could also do a specular layer or a bump map layer, or even an opacity layer. And so let's say I do specular, I hit OK. Let's say only parts of my map are shiny. I can flood my specular with black, and it gets rid of all of our highlights, and then I can go in here and paint in white. So I can add in the parts that are going to be shiny. Okay? Now, when I'm done with this, you'll see that all of my layers are sort of set up as a a color layer is set up here. So I can right click and just say export channel merged, or I can export my channels to a PSD. But if I do merged, basically it's just going to let me save out a flattened version of all of my color. And so that's going to give me a new color map I can apply in Maya. Now if we haven't exceeded an extremely large amount of polygons here, here's what we can do. We can go to File, Send to Maya, and we're going to see Add Selected to Current Scene. Nothing is selected, okay. Send Mesh at Current Level. Okay, so now this is, we don't always want to do this, but right now I'm going to do it because I think it'll be alright. I'll hit OK. Let's hope for the best. My computer's making a windy noise. There we go. Let's go see if it's in there. Maya may or may not be crashing. Okay. So how y'all doing? Hope this is going well for you. So filling, I don't think Maya's crashed, I think Maya's thinking real hard. There we go. And so you'll see that now we have two models in here. We have this extremely high res one. We have this extremely low res one. Right. I'm just going to go to 5 so we're not getting too confused here. And I believe I can now grab this and grab this. And you'll see that they have the same UV set because it's the same model. I just up-resed it, right? And so now I can go to normals. Oh, I think this is under render. I'm sorry. Rendering. Render. This always takes me a minute before I can find it. Shading. I think it's transfer maps. Okay, yeah. Okay, so what we have now is two files. We have two models. We have this one, which is pSphere 1, and this other one, which is pSphere 2. Okay, so map 1, map 2, display mesh. Okay, so we're going to add the target mesh, and I'm going to add the low res, add selected. Okay. Here, let's hit close. I'm going to deselect everything and try this again. Text, lighting rendering, transfer maps. Okay. So the target mesh needs to be pSphere 1. Okay. The source mesh needs to be pSphere 2. Okay, so that took it out of there. What we're going to bake is normals. Okay, and so this is the type of file we can bake out. I would probably do a DDS or maybe an IFF or a PSD. Just do something high res, don't do a JPEG because you're going to get some artifacting. I think we're going to do tangent space if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Connect maps to shader. My common output, that's way too small. Do at least 2048, but if you want to go higher you can. Sampling quality, I'm going to do high in the real one, but for right now, just for this, I'll do preview low. And then texture fill seams. We may have to play around with that a little bit, but if I do bake and close, Maya's going to do some thinking. And you'll see this sampling going on down here. It's going to be very exciting as we watch this thing count to 100. But basically what Maya's doing now is it's taking all of this mesh change, right, on the higher res mesh, and it's baking that into a normal map. And a normal map, your normal is how the light interacts with a face. So it's kind of like, depending on how you have your normal set, the light, if it's just set to normal, or to the standard way that Maya would have it, it's just going to hit that face, thinking of it as flat and kind of rounded along the edges. And so that's how you kind of get that smoothness. Now, if you ever see where your sphere looks faceted, that means Maya's only thinking of that face as perfectly flat. So it's information about how the light should interact and bounce off of your faces. And so what this is doing is it's baking these shapes into that normal information. And so the way the light bounces off your face will actually be dictated by how it would have bounced off of this object, even though this object is much more high quality. And so it's going to give us what sort of feels like some fake detail here. So I'm going to hide this, hit 6, and you can see that it looks like that's on there now. See that? And so this is still our low-res mesh. We get this high-res information on here. Now, that's just if you need to use that. Now, if you're needing a really high-res version of your model so you can see those lumps, you can try using this version of it, right? And this will give you a better silhouette here. And you can see that. But this is a really high-res model, and it's going to slow your scene down. What maybe you should consider doing is going here and stepping down. If you hit page down, you're going to step down a subdivision level. Get it to one where you're happy enough with how it looks, maybe that one, and send that to Maya as your detail, or as your model. And then you can also, if you still want to paint or send out the really high res one and bake down your normals for that, you can. Okay, so I think that covers most of that. Yeah, and so this is pretty high. I probably wouldn't go over 2 or 3 million faces in Maya, because you'll probably crash it. But that should cover the basics of this. Now, many of you are like, you're needing to paint some mountains or something like that. And so if I just go File, New Scene, save. Oh, that is not what I wanted. File, New Scene. Try this again. Just want a plain. Right. Right now, this is going to be pretty low res, but we could start painting on this. So we want to. Oh, I want to sculpt it. I want to hold down B to get my brush the right size. I'm going to hold down Control to sort of paint and push it in. Probably going to raise my amount of pressure here. And so let's say we have a canyon in here. I'm just going in here and painting in a basic, push that down. Right. And so we got a good start. Mesh, add new subdivision. And so now we can start maybe using like the knife to cut some shapes in here. So that's where I where I lowered those before. And so this is just going to get more and more detailed the more you sort of paint and sculpt into this. Right now I'm just kind of keeping it somewhat smooth because I want to add the detail in later. And so you see we're getting some interestingness here, just sort of carving these, chiseling these sections out of it, right? And so now for your scene, you could be flying down through here, and of course you could get this even higher, higher res in Maya. But what you want to watch out for is that when you render this, that we don't see the edge there. So maybe what you're really going for would look much more like this. Maybe grab this, and I don't know, like we're gonna have to make sure you don't see that edge just kind of hanging out there, and you want to feel like that. We can always see sort of the sloping of the Earth, and so just kind of getting your idea, or the planet. So just getting your idea of like how this is going to be laid out to get your push across here. Now this, you can do this with any object you create. So you can make a giant like half dome or something inside of I don't know where that went, but you can make like sort of a giant half dome inside of Maya and send that in, and that should work that way as well. I believe that's everything. I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. I'm probably going to do another video on some basic deformation stuff afterwards, but hopefully this will get you a good start on Mudbox. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.